This is a webcast of the Keystones to Opportunities Professional Development Session 1 using data for literacy decision making. You can pause this presentation at any time and resume it at your convenience. In front of you, you should have a copy of the PowerPoint notes pages on which to capture your thinking, questions, or concerns about the information in this PowerPoint, and also a copy of an article by Victoria Bernhardt entitled Multiple Measures. Please do feel free to communicate your questions to us via email, and we will get back to you as quickly as possible. The goal of this presentation is to introduce you to the idea of multiple measures, which include demographic, school processes, perceptions, and student learning data. And once you have these in mind, to use them in your decision-making process to positively impact student literacy outcomes. During the presentation, you'll get an overview of the Keystones to Opportunities grant and goals. You'll read an article by Victoria Bernhardt, which nicely lays out the importance and impact of the multiple measures. And hopefully you'll have time with colleagues to discuss the next steps that can be informed by looking at your decision making through these multiple measures. To give you a little background about the grant, the KtO grant started as a federal grant entitled the Striving Readers Grant. Monies were made available to states, and $200 million went to Pennsylvania. In our district, 350 school districts applied to have some of those grant monies funneled to them, and 56 districts were awarded grant money. Our district got the most, $10 million in grant monies to spend over 5 years, focused on supporting our struggling readers and making strides in our literacy instruction. As with all grants, there are some goals that must be met, and they must be met sufficiently every year in order for the grant to continue. The state, too, must meet these goals, and its grant and our grant are aligned for that purpose. The first of our goals is to align our literacy instruction with the goals of the state along a continuum from birth through grade 12. In year 1, all teachers in the district are to receive 9 professional development sessions, and this is the first of those sessions. These are designed to support a common academic language. In this case, we'll be talking about multiple measures with some common terms. These sessions are also designed to build capacity at the building level, and that's why the representatives who come to these sessions are being asked to turn the training around to all staff at their buildings. We also have to administer an assessment, which we already have, the grade assessment, and it is targeted at grade levels 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, and 11, which are the grade levels that the Striving Readers Grant, the Keystones to Opportunity Grant in our district, is targeting. The Pittsburgh Public Schools team also is tasked with developing a comprehensive literacy plan, sometimes referred to as the CLP. And the specialists will be working with supervisors and content people across all content areas in order to develop a comprehensive literacy plan from birth through 12 that aligns to the state's literacy plan. Those are requirements for the grant monies. We have to show that we are working on these and making adequate progress every year in order for the grant to continue. In order to get an overview of the state's plan, the one that we need to also align ourselves to, you should definitely look at the SAS website, which is really the more user-friendly version of the PDE website. There you'll find their explanation, their vision and mission, what they believe to be the guiding principles for literacy, and this can drill down as far as you'd like to go down to um, a plan for each grade level. Here is the website that you can check out, and if we go there, oops, I don't know if it's going to want to let me do that. You can see that this is interactive. There are tremendous resources here. I encourage you to become a member, which is free, obviously. I became a member, and it allows you to access things down to instructional materials, lesson plans that are aligned to the keystones and also the Common Core. And you can get a new view of your standards by grade level and subject area. Just explore the site. I spent a couple of hours one day and learned a tremendous amount about not only the grant, but also the system in place for the keystones and the supports available to us. So we'll turn our attention now to the topic of the grant, which is how we use data when we're making decisions about student placement, about instruction. Victoria Bernhardt, the author of the article, Multiple Measures, says that if you're only looking at student learning data, you're missing 65% of the data. We know that looking at a single point of data is never a great decision-making tool for placement or instructional decisions for children, but we often feel that if we're looking at multiple data points, we have a much better picture of the student, and that's true. However, with Bernhardt's perspective, we're only looking at one type of data, and that would be the student learning data. In addition to student learning data, or the data we get from assessments, she also says that we need to consider the environmental assessments or surveys, formative and summative data, demographic data, and school processes data. For the rest of this presentation, we'll be going deeper into each one of those. So if some seem unfamiliar to you now, just hang in there. When we look at this graphic about data, you see that we have three different divisions of a continuum here. We have data, we have information, and we have knowledge in this pyramid. And we have the activities associated with them going vertically up the pyramid, including collecting data, organizing data, summarizing data, analyzing, synthesizing, and decision making based on data. And what the presenter originally asked us to do was to turn and talk and think about where we are as a school community, when it comes to what we do with data. Of course, the data that we were considering at that point was simply assessment data, student learning data. And we said that, yes, we collected a lot of data, and we organized a lot of data, creating spreadsheets to look at things all different ways. Sometimes we did some summarizing when we looked at groups like grade levels or disaggregated information about our students. So we were starting to get into the information usage of data. But for the most part, we all agreed that we were pretty much compiling data, compiling it and organizing it in different ways. And that took up the majority of our time. If we got into the information, it was often too general to address needs of individual kids, and it rarely got to the point where it had a direct influence on the decision making that we were using to make instructional decisions to support our struggling readers. Now, every different group of people had a different take on how far up the pyramid they were managing to get, but I know as a coach and as a literacy specialist that the summarizing and the analyzing were about as far as I got, and a lot of it was organizing. If you're watching this with a group of people, you might want to pause the presentation here to discuss where you see yourself spending the majority of your time when it comes to data. And if you have any questions or comments, to take some notes down that you can send off to us to respond to. Victoria Bernhardt's work on multiple measures is what the KtO grant and the Federal Striving Readers grant are really based on, and that's opening up our ideas about what constitutes data and how to use many different sources of data in order to better understand our students and their needs. So, in the original PD, we jigsawed the article multiple measures, and then each sort of taught our section to the group. In this form, I think it might be better just to have you take a break and read the article. So let's take a look at what was contained in this article. If I were to do a gist of this article, I guess I would say that in the beginning here, she sets the stage for an understanding that multiple measures has often meant multiple measures of student achievement, things like our SRI scores, our PSSAs, and on, our CBAs, and that looking at a single one, as we know, and we can attach to our prior knowledge, a single data point we know is very unreliable when it comes to making decisions about a student's ability and what they need next. But then she goes on to say that even though multiple measures are being used, there's still the student achievement measures scores on tests, and that educators and researchers like yourself believe that we're missing 50% of the picture when that's all we take a look at. And I think as educators we know that. We know that we learn more when we talk to kids about why they got a certain score, or that on any given day you're not necessarily getting the best, most accurate read on a student, even if you have multiple measures. So she then went on, and this is the key point, to give us additional measures that we should be considering, such as demographic, perceptions of the students and the community, student learning data, which is the data that we deal with, but that shouldn't be the only, and school processes, which I find very interesting because we're talking about the way the school runs, from class structures to whether or not fire bells went off in the middle of an exam. So we move on in this article to then look at each of these independently and to see how we can learn so much more when they intersect. So the demographic data, and I'm sure we're all familiar with what this means. She talks about whether or not a kid is a regular attender. That makes a huge difference when you're looking at data. If you look at even a teacher-made test and you look at your data, and if you don't take into consideration, well, this is somebody who's there every day on time, versus this is the score of somebody who misses at least 2 classes a week and is habitually late. That affects what we do with their data, with the score they got on that test, how we interpret it, and the next moves. We often disaggregate by grade level, and we watch how things grow from year to year. Disaggregating with ethnicity and gender, we do that when we look at PSSA. Native language is something I'm less familiar with, but in certain schools I'm sure that has a huge impact on looking at data. So these are all important things to take into consideration. Perceptions. We know that students' perceptions of their teachers, of their school, of their own abilities highly affects their achievement and their data in a larger sense. So, for instance, when I think about the PSSA and I think about the students' perceptions of that test, and we all know that since it's not counting for a grade, their perception of it is not nearly as strong as our perception is in terms of its importance. So how do we gather this data? Well, we gather it with questionnaires. We gather it with interviews and observations. I think at this point we're starting to gather perceptions data with tripod in a much more rigorous way, but teachers have always gathered this data informally. We move on to the student learning data, which of course is the more familiar data for us. And I think she rightly points out that the data of student assessment is what we normally think of as multiple measures. So we take a look at not only the student's last PSSA, but we also look at their SRI scores and any other diagnostic information that we have available. If we do that in addition to looking at these other factors, then we're really putting together a much more thorough picture of what students can do, why the results look the way they do, and what we should do about it. Finally, the school processes was also a bit new to me, although we all probably know that, for instance, when we're gathering student achievement data, the processes by which we gather that, the PSSA plan, how the environment is set up, that all affects the results that we get on a test. So, for instance, if there is a very tranquil kind of setting for students to take a test, and they are able to focus for as much time as they wish and have the time that they need, their achievement data on that test, that their student learning data, is likely to be more accurate, a picture of their ability, than if they are in a disruptive environment with bells ringing and whatnot. And school personnel have been taking this into account quite a bit when we do things like the PSSA. But we also look at school processes in terms of programs, instructional strategies, classroom practices. And these are all things that come up on the rise. These are all things that come up when we talk about our curriculum, and the curriculum that's how the fidelity to the DL pattern in the case of literacy. So this is a very large basket of information. Her point being that it needs to be taken into consideration when you're looking at any combination of student data. In the summary paragraph of the article, she says the moral of the story is, and I think that this is a good place to look for if you really want to get what's being said here in a nutshell. If we don't like our results, then and we want to get different results, we can't just look at student achievement measures because, as some people call them, they're a post-mortem. You're looking at something, the results of which you can't really do that much about. And it's not really a full picture of information. So we're making decisions based on 50% of the picture. And so focusing our response to this data on this partial data can really sometimes lead us down the wrong path. So if you take something like the PSSA and you think about how these other factors affect your scores, how perception, not only of the student's perception of that test, but of their school, of their individual teachers, of themselves as being able, then you really begin to look, and if you have data on that through interviews or whatever, then maybe you realize from intersecting those points that this particular student's low score of basic or below basic on the PSSA is more a function of their taking the test seriously or taking their own abilities seriously. And then you have a different response in terms of how you help that student to achieve. As she says in her final statement, we want school personnel to use their time figuring out how to be better for all students, rather than figuring out how to look at the data differently, that truncated data differently. So we'll move along now to the original presentation. And after we read the multiple measures and discussed this, we then turned to each of the types of data, the data sources, to look a little bit more deeply at the implications. And the demographic data examples that were presented to us were broken down into community and district considerations. So the community level, the location, the history of the community, what's been going on in that community that could be affecting the students' learning. Also, of course, and we're very familiar with this, economic trends, population trends. The transiency in our district is always something that we've taken into consideration when we look at data and individual student achievement. And socioeconomic status, of course, is well known and familiar to us. At the district level, I found that this was a nice addition to the way we think about demographics. Think about the number of schools we're serving, the numbers of administrators and students that we have to serve, as in comparison to perhaps other districts that we're being compared to. Within our buildings, which teachers in our buildings are new to that building, and what supports are there for them, and how does it affect their students that they are new in the building, or new to a grade level, or a curriculum, or new to the district? How does that impact student learning, and therefore how does that impact our data? And the history of the building. We have schools that are closing, that are combining, that are changing their configuration. How does the way that's handled affect the students and affect the district and the achievement of individual students? Moving on, still with demographic data, we also have to look at the things that are going on within the school, such as whether or not the school has been supplied with grants, whether they receive Title I funding, whether or not their staff is adequate to their population in terms of the sizing, class sizes, whether or not there are programs in place such as tutoring or mentoring. We have to look at students over time and by grade, the numbers, the gender, race, and ethnicity, how those transform over through time, how many students we have with IEPs, how many programs we have in place to meet different student needs, and also the graduation rate. Now, this is all with the understanding that we don't have control as staff members over much of this. However, when we take a look at it and gather this information, we can help to ameliorate the effects of some of these things when it comes to our students' learning. We can get things in place to help with the transition of students. We can help perhaps to anticipate class sizes in a more accurate way so that we're ready when the year begins. As with many things in the Pittsburgh Public Schools, we should be proud that we're ahead of the curve on many of these issues, and one of them is the perceptions data. We are gathering perceptions data, and we have been for a while. Most recently, I suppose, with the tripod. But what they're saying here is that a very, very big indicator of what needs to be done in a school has to do with the perceptions not only of the students but the staff, the parents, alumni, and you need to gather this data and respond to it in ways that change the perception to a more positive one. We need only think about the buildings that we've served ourselves, and we know what our perceptions have been and how that might have affected our performance and our students' performance. So we are in the process of gathering this data and how that data is used to raise the perception of especially the students, so of themselves and of their school surroundings is of very high importance. It may be a bit controversial to state, and it may touch home a bit, but we need to think about the statement added at the bottom of this screen. It helps us to understand what others think about the learning environments that we are creating and working in, because people act in congruence with what they believe, perceive, or think about different topics, such as the school that their child is attending, the school that they themselves are working in. And whether or not we agree with those perceptions, they are real and they need to be taken into consideration so that a more accurate, if we believe them to be inaccurate, a more accurate perception can be formed. Again, student learning data is probably what we're all most comfortable and familiar with. And this slide just gives us a list of some of the sources that we currently use. And RTI and Pinnacle are both very strong tools for manipulating this data. The point is, though, that manipulating this data in isolation can be extremely misleading, and that taking into account demographic, school processes, and perceptions all help us make better sense out of the data that we gather so abundantly. Going deeper with school processes, we have to look at our curriculum. We have to look at its design. We have to look at its content. We have to look at the instructional strategies that are embedded in that curriculum to see if they do indeed support students. We have to look at our assessment strategies and classroom practices, all of which can dramatically affect the data that we see in the student learning data, and all of which should inform our response. Where do we need to make changes? What are student perceptions, teacher perceptions, community perceptions of our school processes, and how is that affecting achievement? We need to get a little bit better at gathering this type of data. We're very good at gathering the student achievement data, but gathering data about our strategies, our practices, and seeing how those are affecting our results, documenting those processes so that we can align them to where we want to move. So to conclude this summary of the first Keystones to Opportunities professional development, I'd like you to think for a moment and jot down how the information presented in this PowerPoint could affect decision making for literacy and for really across content, because there's literacy in every content. How might it affect next steps for your school? What data sources do you feel are not being paid close enough attention to, or even are not even being used as sources? Is there a gathering process? Is there a documenting process? And how is it being used in intersection with your student learning data? If you have the opportunity to discuss this with your peers in some forum, perhaps in instructional cabinet or in a content meeting, please document that and let us know if this has been helpful to you. Please too be sure to sign that you have attended this professional development, and thank you for your time.